So welcome on our virtual trip around the world. We have now come virtually to Lebanon. And my name is Henrik Grønnet. I am coming from the organization called International Media Support. This is an organization that helps media with development and capacity building. And beside that, I have also been a fellow at the Constructive Institute. And we're going to talk very much about dialogue, bridge building in journalism tonight. And I have been working with Lebanon for the last 10 years. And I have, when I was a fellow here, together with the American University of Beirut, we developed a curriculum and had young journalist students in to train them in actually doing constructive journalism as something new. With me here is a panel and very, very qualified people. So I'll just introduce you. Right here, we have Eve Perlman. Eve, what can you tell about yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here and looking forward to hearing from the other two folks and you also. I'm a journalist based in the United States. I worked in the San Francisco Bay Area in California for the bulk of my career. Wrote on lots of things: health, parenting, local news, government, education. Spaceship Media, which is the organization I now run, was founded in 2016. We began conceptualizing it in the run-up to our 2016 election, which was quite contentious. It came from my partner who I founded it with. We just started thinking about how we could interact differently with the public and take some of the standard approaches to coverage of conflict and maybe rethink them. And so we started to think about how we could go to places of conflict and instead of crafting stories that chose perhaps the most strident, most partisan voices, rather go to those hotspots, those places, and invite ordinary people into conversation and tease out nuance and think about that act in relationship to trust.
Then we have Mikkel. Mikkel has just joined us here in Constructive Institute. And what else can you say about yourself, Mikkel?
Yeah, again, I will echo what Eve said. I'm grateful to be joining this panel. I think we're going to have a very fruitful discussion about this topic. So yeah, my name is Mikkel Gudsø and I'm from Denmark. I used to be a lawyer for 10 years, but in the last 15 years, I've been studying negotiation and conflict resolution. I'm also a trained mediator. I hold the position as honorary associate professor in negotiation at Aarhus University. And yeah, I was assigned by Constructive Institute to look into how we can use some of the principles of negotiation and conflict resolution, like mediation, use those into creating a toolbox that we call bridge building toolbox, which is very much in the making at the moment, to see if we can draw upon the qualities and competencies of mediation and see if we can somehow integrate those tools into journalism and in that way enhance the communication.
And then we have Alia Ibrahim. Alia, tell about yourself and why you're here actually.
I'm Alia Ibrahim. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Just listening to you, Eve and Mikkel, and thinking about how much the situation in Lebanon could look like an interesting case studies case study for you guys is already, I find it exciting. I'm the co-founder of Daraj Media. I'm a journalist. I've been working as a journalist for almost 20 years now. I started working at the English language newspaper in Beirut, the Daily Star, and after that I worked for a while at the Washington Post. After that I moved to TV in Arabic. I decided to change audiences, so I did TV at one of the main leading channels in the Arab world. And then part of what I did was covering the demonstrations of the Arab Spring for the network, which took me to all the protests and the beginning of the good days of the revolution until it started derailing. In 2016, and as the situation in Yemen was becoming increasingly at the humanitarian level and the political level complicated, I left the TV, and along with other journalists, we decided that we took the Arab Spring very. We were very excited about it. In the early years, we genuinely believed that good change was actually coming to the Arab world. Eventually, we realized that the media was part of the problem. It was not just on the side, it was part of the problem. And for us, the need for an independent media was very obvious. So, and also the possibility to start an independent media became possible because of digital. So along with other journalists, we started Daraj, which in Arabic means steps. And the idea was to try to get out of the hole we were in, just like step by step. The situation was really, really very bleak. I wish I could say that 3 years on, the situation is better anywhere around us in the Arab world. Mostly it's still a very intense situation. Where I am right now in Lebanon, we've been witnessing, I think, one of the biggest economic crisis. It's a full collapse at the economic level, paralleled by an explosion that happened just a few months ago in August, which is a historic explosion that came at a moment where the country is already bankrupt and cannot rebuild. All that is happening in the middle of a political stalemate. We're without a government right now. The situation in Lebanon might be too dramatic, but it's not also too far from what's happening in other areas, in other countries of our region.
So the idea for this session is to actually try to look at possibilities, try to look at the bridge building instead of just media being part of the conflict, and trying to look how can we be part of the solution. So that's what we'll be talking about, and Lebanon is in, and the open question is that realistic, or is it just something we can do in the West, even with the problems we have here? I would actually like to start, Eve, again with you, telling about Spaceship Media, and starting with what was your background? What did you do up until then, and why did you decide to change?
This is a really interesting question. Why did I decide to change? And the way I think about it is I always felt to some degree at odds with sort of standard journalistic practices as I know them, and I can only speak from my experience, but as I know them in this country. And so I went to a very fancy journalism school here, and with my peers who believed in objectivity and neutrality and fiercely held a kind of hard, what I saw even then as a rigidity around their relationship to other people, and I have always tilted towards focusing on community, holding community, thinking about convening. And I always felt a little at odds with like other people. And so I really think of Spaceship, the practice we've developed for convening conversations, the way we relate to communities that are at odds, the way we relate to other journalists, as an expression of what I think was latent in me all the way through. You know, I was always keenly aware that I have very strong political beliefs, very strong social beliefs, very strong ideas about society. You know, I had my kids in public school. I very much supported funding for schools. I very much support, you know, single payer healthcare. I have all kinds of views and beliefs, and I was a columnist for many years. And so it was always like that confusing to me that I would write an opinion and then write a straight news story. So I really do think of Spaceship as an expression of what I think journalism should be, which is holding community, supporting community, not just with the flow of information, which I think is vital and amazing. And I think I really want to say, I think there's lots of ways to be a journalist, and mine is just one way, right? There's amazing people doing all kinds of work in all different ways. But what has become increasingly clear to me over the time I've been doing this work is how facts aren't at all enough, you know, and we have the facts. You know, if you take the US context right now, we know Trump didn't win the election. We know COVID is an infectious disease that can be mitigated by certain behaviors, and yet we have a huge segment of our populace that doesn't believe that. And so these interlinked problems of relationship and trust and information are what fascinates me, and what is at the core of our practice, which is based, and I won't go on too much, but at the core, it's about inviting people through a structured process to see one another as human, right? To recognize our shared fate and our like interests. And we talk a lot about, we all, despite myriad differences, care about the health of our children, care about the health of our parents, want a better, safer life for ourselves. The vast majority of people. And we are in so many countries around the world trapped in states of anger and hatred and vitriol. And so our work is in that space of recognizing shared humanity, holding people in conversation, and interweaving information into that process, which is different than so many people that do great work around bridge building and dialogue. But we really think about information in relationship to dialogue across difference.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eva. I like to change into Lebanon, where we are, and show a little video clip first to show why there is a need for a dialogue and the media to have a role there also.
دكتور فايز ما رح نوصل لنتيجه يعني ما رح نوصل لنتيجه. انا رايي اتمنى عليك كنت يا ريت بس انت بتسمعش. يا ريت تسمع الحديث اللي حكيه الرئيس الاسد. لا سمعته يا سيدي. سمعته نعم. شو سمعته ولكن انا ما بصدقه. لمين؟ لا بشار الاسد. ما بتصدق بشار الاسد؟ لا ما بصدقه. لك ليش انت مينك لحتى ما تصدق الرئيس الاسد؟ شرف حافظ على هدوء. انا محافظ على هدوء بس عيب عليك لا عيب عليك انك تقول عيب. لك عيب عليك تقول لا عيب عليك انك تقول عيب. عيب عليك تقول ما بصدق. عيب عليك ما بصدقه لانه كذاب. انت واحد كذاب ومعلمك كذاب. شرف ليك عيب عليك انت ابني. لك انت ابني. دكتور فايز انا واحد صبي المخابرات ما بيقول لي هالحكي هذا. انا صبي مخابرات انا صرمتي اشرف منك. دكتور فايز دكتور مصطفى دكتور مش هتفوتك. لا شباب
So Alia, this is not typical, but I would say if you Google Lebanon and politician fighting in TV, you can find quite a lot of examples.
I wish I could say that's not typical. Obviously, you don't see it every day, but it happens a lot. It's not unusual either. Source of national pride, really. I think, yes, we really have a serious problem when it comes to dialogue. I think partly this is also, this particular type of shows is based on ratings, and it's based, there are a lot of factors that make sure when you invite these two people to the set, you know that they're going to give you a show. And this happens a lot on Lebanese mainstream media. This is obviously, there's no shame in it. Even the TV stations that encourage this have no shame in it. It goes viral for days. It's the talk of the town for days. It repeats itself because it's celebrated and it becomes a joke. Unfortunately, everything in Lebanon is a joke. I mean, probably a lot of people consider this part of our resilience. Like this is a country that 24 hours after a disaster is capable of creating jokes. And I cannot, like, honestly, after a while, sometimes maybe you need this kind of breathers to survive, especially when you're feeling completely out of control. But to stay focused on the idea of dialogue, the problem, I think, is not only that we are incapable of engaging in dialogue with people we don't like, with the other. Even dialogue among the people who agree on what they want, on the destination where they want to be, their values. They're incapable of engaging in a dialogue that wants to get somewhere. Like Eve was talking about the different stages, and I think if we look at the numbers, like I think what we've been having since October 17. In October 17 last year, we had popular protests that brought like a big majority of the people on the streets, and what resulted was a lot of groups that were formed, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, what would be the nucleus for political activities, etc. I think if I look at your roadmap, I think we stop at gather, like the possibility of engaging.
Gather now. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, people gather, they come together, they're capable of engaging in a social conversation that in a lot of cases actually involves a lot of accusation. I mean, I'm talking a little bit after agreeing on what generally they want. When they start talking about a possible, like setting an agenda, setting a strategy, knowing where we want to go, building a structure for anything actually constructive is a serious problem. And a year later, very, very few groups were capable of actually getting started, like probably moving forward 2 squares on. This is not justifiable, but it's understandable given the fact that we don't have a political life for the last 30 years. Like my whole generation, like all the generation I belong to, we grew up during a civil war, and after that we had the warlords taking over the political life in the country. What we have, and we call political parties, are actually militias who made sure that no real conversation happens. We have a lot, I mean, Lebanon could be misleading and it looks like we have freedom of speech and we have a rich political life, but we don't. We have this, we have like, it could be a little bit more, sometimes it could look like more, a better structured, more political, more, but it's really a fight, a match between what looks like opposition and what looks like the government, when it's really the same people talking to each other who are the political elite, and everybody else is outside the conversation.
Exactly, and if you look at that media, they want a good fight, and that's what it's about. That's the entertainment they get out of it. So what and how much is the media thinking, like Eve is thinking, that we have an obligation, we need to get a dialogue? That's the core mission of media.
At the level of the mainstream media, I'd say zero. Like, they're not interested in this. They are very much, the mainstream media in Lebanon is part of the establishment. When we had the protests happening, we really needed the mainstream media, because unless you have live coverage of what's happening on the ground, you don't really have a coverage. The independent media alone, the majority of the people is on TV. And what happened is that the mainstream media could not cover the protests. Like, they would lose all credibility. But what happened is that they would do the live transmission, live coverage, use the language of the protest, say they're on the side of the protesters, etc. Like, get the credibility they need to stay on. And then they would, for example, give open airtime for the people representing the establishment. For example, we have right now a full economic collapse where the central bank and the banks are the main actors responsible for over 1 million depositors not having access to their funds, losing all their money. It's really a tremendous story. None of the mainstream media covered that story. Even more ridiculously, they gave an hour of open space to the central bank governor, unchallenged, like without in a talk show that usually has an audience. They made the special case for him without an audience. Not one question was asked to him to actually tell him who's responsible for all these people who are now under poverty line, who were rich actually. Many of them were not even middle class. Many people who were rich overnight lost access to their funds, to the retirement funds, to their savings, to everything. And overnight this happens, and not one question has been asked to these people. In that sense, you find yourself, and after that, when we had the explosion, we had information that everybody in the government, the president, the prime minister, the judiciary, the security, everybody knew that there was on the port of Beirut, one of the most populated areas in the country, we have 2,750 tons, 2.5 tons of nitrate ammonia. Everybody knew about that. Nobody did anything until now. 4 months later, not one person has been held responsible, and the media is okay with it. So this is part of the problem. Now, as independent media, we found ourselves in this position where we had, especially after August 4, and I want to mention something here. As much as I agree with Eve, like, there is my instinct as a journalist who always felt that we're journalists because we want something good to come out of our journalism. After the Arab Spring, my conviction was to become more of the professional journalist because of the problems in the context we work in. We were getting because of the noise of the amateur journalism. It was really between fake news, between what we were getting. So the need for strictly objective, really like almost old-fashioned journalism was really very strong. I personally thought that we really need to go back to the basics, because otherwise it's just like and obviously separate editorial from reported stories and the spectrum of what kind of journalism you're doing.
Miguel, if we look at what Constructive Institute is trying to do now, and you have a background as a negotiator and a mediator, when you hear these two brave representatives from the media, from two different parts of the world, but still with some very similar things, what do you think? How can Constructive Institute actually form something for media with this?
Yeah, so first of all, it's very interesting to hear, and I think the whole dialogue approach that Eve is representing is very attractive to many media. And I also think that what I hear from you, Elia, is that you're to some extent talking about also some sort of accountability and going back to being the public watchdog, where you're holding the responsible people responsible and the responsible institutions responsible. And that's very traditional journalistic. We at Constructive Institute, in our work with the bridge building toolbox that we're doing, we are not saying that the watchdog role that Elia is promoting is wrong. I think it's necessary. What we are also saying, however, is that in conjunction with that, by displaying all the things that is wrong, all the things that are wrong with when you expose the politicians and the banks, etc., you are also telling the truth and at the same time creating animosity and creating, or in the risk of creating a polarization in society. So I think what could be added to the investigative journalism and the exposure that I agree is necessary is to, when you do this exposure, when you do the investigative journalism, to not only put it out there for the frustrated to get more frustrated from, but put it out there, but at the same time, see how can we have a conversation between the parties involved that are more constructive to facilitate the dialogue in a better way.
So the combination, yeah. I would like to show a video now, actually from what you call the gun control project, where Spaceship Media has been involved. It's Time magazine that shows this, and maybe then after we have seen that, you can talk a little bit about that, Eve.
When I was a junior in high school, one of my classmates came to my high school with a gun and shot my history teacher and killed him, and shot 2 of my friends. 2 teenage daughters who were in high school, who were texting me. We're in a lockdown drill. Everyone else was given a baseball bat, but I only got a golf club. What should I do? And it infuriated me. Here we are again, and my kids are now terrorized.
Do you feel safe that you have a gun?
I sleep with my handgun on my nightstand, and that does make me feel safer.
I'm just saying you in the house sleep. They'll get your weapon first.
Getting my fingerprint opens 2 seconds, right?
Oh, it's in the lockbox.
It's in a lockbox. I do my fingerprint.
I thought she was saying just sit down. Yeah, that's what I was saying.
I practice. I can do it very fast.
I was raised by my godmother. She's had a heck of a life. She was always the victim. I'm like, okay, that is never going to be me. All these laws, all these gun controls also apply to people like me. And I am just that girl living by herself in the middle of a big city.
Today, I felt for the first time that I got to know someone who thinks very differently. Go, okay, I'm having a real conversation with a dues-paying NRA member, and I like them.
I'm born and raised on the south side of Chicago in the Inglewood community. Growing up in my community, I saw a lot of gun violence. At the end of the day, when the conversation came to end, everybody hit the same common thing. It needs to be safety.
It's been almost 3 months since we were in DC. It was so exhilarating. I was very optimistic that we were going to change the world when I left DC. I thought, this is it, man. 20 of us, we're gonna go on tour, and we're gonna have these conversations all over the country, and we're gonna get everybody to do what we're doing and come together.
So this is about actually the when everyone can buy a gun in the US and what happens, and you have these two. I think it's amazing how you have these two sides brought together. Will this be possible in Lebanon to actually bring people together who are so different, and then they will treat each other because they have met, they will treat each other properly?
Look, Henrik, I really don't think we have hope at all in getting, building a country, in building a society, in anything, if we don't think that this is possible. Working for it, and I agree with Mika that we have to keep trying to do that. The things is, you see the possibilities. In a lot of cases, I'll give you one specific example. One of the biggest problems facing Lebanon right now is that it is considered that the Shiite community, the largest sectarian community in the country, is supportive of the armed militia in the country, which is Hezbollah. I personally think if we have a decent election with a decent electoral law, Hezbollah would lose the elections, because right now it's very different from 10 years ago. The public opinion has changed. What makes this impossible to happen is that a dialogue, a conversation is not happening. These people, the Shiite community, thinks if Hezbollah is gone, they're going to be second-hand citizens or second-class citizens in this country. And unless we start talking to each other as communities, we're not going anywhere. Is there anything happening along those lines? Yes, there is the beginning. It's very shy, very small, very unstructured, very small groups are doing it. And when they do it and they succeed, and some did and succeeded, they're being told it's not representative. These are people you put on somebody's payroll. It's really very problematic. What I think is good is that it's now in many people's mind that the only way forward to build a country is to actually we're a country that went out of a civil war, and we went out of a civil war without a national reconciliation. We just closed the war and made the warlords our leaders, unless we go back and talk about these issues that remain the gun in our head, really, we can't move forward. We have to build the structure for this kind of dialogue. Absolutely. How do we do that and who does that too? Because a lot of actors of civil society are building some spaces. Many people are preparing for the elections. And I think those groups working particularly for the elections, which is scheduled to take place in a year and a half from now, are actually working a lot along those lines.
And what will the role of Daras be there? What can
well, what we're doing, we're not announcing it really, but what we're doing is that we're setting the grounds and the space for people who otherwise wouldn't be interviewed. We're giving them the platform to talk about their plans, to talk about what they're doing, how they see the society moving forward. We're making them vocal. And eventually we're responding to the needs of the moment. The strategy is to arrive a few months before elections, and instead of having the usual scene that we usually have, which is like the usual suspects being on every screen in the country, to create this space where alternative voices have a chance to actually win an election based on an agenda that is usually not discussed.
Miguel, a last comment on where you could see a constructive institute in these cases.
Well, thank you, Henrik. And let me start by saying also thank you to Alaya and Eve. I think it's very interesting to hear your point of views on conflict and the situation in general, and also with the things going on in Lebanon. So at Constructive Institute, what we're looking at is how can we improve the quality of how people handle conflicts? How can we enhance the conversations between conflicting parties? And as a journalist, we look into the profession as a very unique profession that has the opportunity to connect people. And it's not necessarily the role of a journalist to get parties to agree to solutions, but we think it's the obligation of a journalist to see if we can use the privilege of bringing people together to also enhance the quality of the conversation they're having. And I would like to share a couple of slides with you that will exemplify how we think about our bridge building toolbox that we are working on developing. So first of all, we're looking at this definition of what is a conflict. And well, a basic definition when you look at it from the dictionary of Cambridge is that we have an active disagreement between people with opposing opinions and principles, as you see on the slide, meaning that there needs to be an active disagreement, meaning that I might be disagreeing with things that Donald Trump is saying, but I'm not in conflict with Donald Trump because we cannot actively prevent each other from doing what we want to do. Another way that we've been kind of attracted towards is the definition from transformative mediation, where they say that conflict is a crisis in human interaction and communication. And when we look at the stairs of conflict on my right, you can see that it's a very human basic thing, that when we have a disagreement and it is not easily resolved, which luckily most disagreements are resolved, but if they are not, we tend to escalate up to personification, and it can then expand and until dialogue is abandoned, and worst case, we end up in polarization. And what we see at Constructive Institute is that the media is very often, unfortunately, playing a role of enhancing the polarization rather than de-escalating the conflict. So they are actually they are supporting the crisis in human interaction rather than helping it. So very often journalists in the hunt for a good story, they bring dynamite together with their microphone, and by that I mean they are actually making the conflict more visible, more explosive, so to speak. So what we have done is we have looked into creating a toolbox where we take elements from the transformative mediation and look at how can we integrate this into journalistic practice. So what we see is in order to build a bridge, actually the foundation is the pylons on each side of the gap. The pylons are the foundation of the bridge. And in transformative mediation, we call that empowerment. We need people to be empowered, be assertive. They need to be so relaxed that they can gain confidence in their own position. And from that point on, when people are empowered, they can start recognizing each other to a higher degree. And that is what we call the connection. And when you have those two parts of the bridge, the empowerment and the recognition, now you have the construction that can actually hold a bridge, hold the road of the bridge. And then it's up to the parties if they want to cross that road, or if they want to find solutions or just accept each other as they are. So the final slide here just shows that when people are in conflict, they tend to de-escalate downwards or spiral down into a destructive communication where they feel weak, they feel self-absorbed, rather than when we empower them, when we make them have a greater sense of recognition, they feel stronger and they become more responsive, and that way they can be more constructive. And that model would be very, very interesting to introduce to the case of Lebanon. So we are working on this toolbox to create tools for journalists that can help societies and conflicts to be not necessarily resolved, but just having conversations about the conflicts in a much more qualitative way than just throwing dynamite and polarization into the conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking part in this.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.